was from their internally generated funds. Now, led to lots of controversies yesterday in Parliament. This morning, we're joined by Kwame Sarpong, Asiedu, who is a CDD-Ghana fellow in health. Kwame, good morning. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning, Winston, and good morning to the team, and thanks for having me.
Great. Before we hear from you, let's just listen to what happened in Parliament yesterday concerning that policy that says district hospitals or hospitals should pay their electricity bills.
It's about human life. The earlier this policy is reversed, this new policy we started June 2023, which is alien to our country. Since independence, we have never had this policy. It's so alien to our country. It must be reversed. The health minister must come and tell us why they introduced this policy.
Morning Show. So, Kwame, what's your take on this? Good policy, or you think it's a policy that has to be reversed immediately?
Thanks, Winston. You see, sometimes I struggle when I hear some of these things, and I'll try and be very balanced about this situation. So what situation are we confronted with? We are confronted with a situation where the ECG is struggling, and as a result of them struggling, our energy security is threatened. And we have seen it with the independent power producers sometimes threatening to take off the lights. So that's the problem, the root cause of the problem. And so what's the solution? The solution is for ECG to break even or at least be profitable. How do you achieve that? It's for everyone to pay their bills and pay realistic tariffs. So I understand from that point what problem we are trying to solve. Now, let's then look at why is the health sector failing to pay its bills? Health is a public service good. And public service goods are not supposed to run at a profit. At best, they are supposed to run and break even.
Okay.
But I can understand also that someone sitting there would say, why can private hospitals and quasi-government health facilities like the religious health facilities pay for their electricity and still survive? So why can't the public sector pay? Then the question arises, is the public sector hospitals, are they charging realistic fees? The answer is no. We all know that. So then the cookie starts to crumble because you want them to pay realistic fees, but for even from Parliament fees and charges, they are not allowed to charge realistic rates for health. That's one aspect. Then the second aspect is, how do they get paid when they provide health service at these unrealistic fees? They get paid by two ways. It's either the person paying out of pocket because they do not have an insurance policy, or they pay through the National Health Insurance. So that is how they get their money. And it's from this money that they disperse for everything that the health sector does, because that's their inflow of cash. The NHIS funds are not coming. We know the NHIS is indebted to these hospitals. Why is the NHIS funds not coming? It's not coming because since 2017, the same government that's telling these hospitals to pay has capped the funding to NHIS. So the fund doesn't have liquidity to pay these hospitals. Do you see where I'm going, Winston?
Sure.
So the government doesn't, the funds are not coming for the hospitals to be paid. So the government goes to them and says, use your internal generated funds to pay for these. What are some of the internal generated funds? Like provision of dialysis services, like provision of private services to the same Ghanaian, right? The taxes on the provision of these services are making these services run at a loss. Not long ago, we were all lamenting about the dialysis problem with Kolebu. So is the internal generated funds breaking even? The answer is for most hospitals, no. So therefore, it's becoming clear that the hospitals cannot pay based on their funding inflows for the electricity. So it's not about the policy being a good or bad policy, because the policy aims to resuscitate ECG. But in attempting to resuscitate ECG, we are sending our healthcare facilities into intensive care. Is that what we want to do? And If we are sending our health facilities into intensive care, what does it mean? It means when you go to accident and emergency, if they don't have electricity, they cannot manage you. It means theaters might not be able to operate. And you see, and that is why I say sometimes, just sometimes, I do not even understand how our calculus thinking works and how we disaggregate problems to solve them. I don't think there's any project management strategy when it comes to solving problems, because we do not look at the full paradigm of the problem to see what are the individual pain points that need to be unpicked to solve the problem. So what do we see? The same ECG that is claiming to run at a loss, that we are trying to resuscitate, ends up buying motorcycles for the Ghana Police Service. So the police get the motorcycles, the policeman is trying to police you and I, is riding on these motorcycles, is chasing a criminal, has an accident, gets to the emergency, and there's no electricity. Now who calls up?
So I mean, you've raised several points, and one of those points you've raised, for instance, is whether they can fund this, and also the payment of realistic, fees, for instance. So let's look at it from this point of view, first of all, before we get to the other point. So if we increase the fees to realistic fees, would these hospitals then be able to pay their electricity bills from their internally generated funds?
No, they wouldn't. Because, you see, Winston, we would not increase it to realistic fees. Because for you to increase fees in the hospitals, you have to go to Parliament. Because these are statutory fees and charges. Parliament knows. Look at and that's why I used the dialysis as an example, cancer therapy. Those things, the things that are not covered by the NHIS, which are the diseases that can bankrupt anyone when they get it. The cancers of this world, the renal failures of this world. Those are what generates the bulk of the internal generated funds for these hospitals. We know, based on all the calculations, that the average Ghanaian, 70 to 80% of Ghanaians at this point in time, should they get renal failure, are shut out even at the current fee rate from accessing dialysis at the required rate of 3 times a week. So if you go and you say you're going to increase for them to pay realistic fees, is the government going to increase wages for the Ghanaian worker? You see, so Winston, we are trying to solve one problem and we are trying to just open a can of worms. And that is so the answer is they wouldn't, even if we went to realistic fees, the first thing they'll do is to break even because they are already in debt. You know that at the last count, Kolebu was in debt of 4 million cedis just at the renal unit.
Yeah.
So if you start paying realistic fees, what do you think would be the rational thing to do? It would be to clear this debt so that they can still be operational. Would that not be the rational thing to do?
Sure.
So then when would you get to pay the ECG? By that time, wouldn't the ECG have cut off your electricity? And would those patients have electricity for the renal unit to run? So don't let us play these chicken and egg situations. We need to get real and say we are solving the problem. First, the government should just uncap the NHIS funds to start with. Let's get some liquidity into the hospitals. And then we can start having a valid conversation. Having the conversation about the minority fund generator of any hospital, which is the internal generated funds, which is the least of their cash cows, is just disingenuous. The bigger cash cow, which is the NHIS, you are holding it by the jugular. You do not want to have that conversation. And you want to have the conversation about drip irrigation, feeding the hospitals drip by drip to keep them surviving. I mean, what sort of governance is this? Who did this to us?
But but Kwame, I mean, you also make the point that, so for instance, the private hospitals, they are able to pay. You said that's because they pay realistic charges. Many people today go to private hospitals and would have to pay using insurance. Many of us use private insurance, and we go to these private hospitals, and we're able to pay. Even with a cap, can't the NHIS pay these hospitals so that some of these revenues could be used in paying the electricity bills?
Look, Winston. Do you know the cap? The current cap means less than 20%. Do you know that in 2021, only 6% of receivables got to the NHIS?
Yes.
Are you aware of that?
Yes, you shared that document with me.
It's not me sharing that document. It was in the holistic assessment of the health sector's, what do you call it, scope of work.
Yeah.
It's a statutory government document. So it's not me sharing it. The government knows. The irony, and that's why I said, who did this to us? The irony is when the minority then put it out before that report was, the government held a press conference to flatly deny it. You see, it's this disingenuity that for me is at the heart of the whole problem. So let's look at it this way. You've already capped almost 80% of all the funds. So already they can only get just about 20% of the funds. You are paying 6%. So where are they going to find the money? Do you know the amount of money owed even community pharmacies?
Tell me.
So when they said that they were going to go cash and carry because the NHIS wasn't paying them?
Yeah, sure.
Has the situation changed? You see, Winston, and that is why I'm saying that there seems not to be any project management strategy when it comes to solving our health problems. It is just impulsive, reactionary. Yes, we cannot pay. Yes, the ECG needs money. Yes, the independent power producers are backing at us. Okay, what do we do? Hospitals, go and pay. So we have put a plaster and we've papered over the cracks. But there's a bigger problem down the line that is coming. And so much as I wouldn't go down the line of what Honorable Okujetua Blackwell was saying, that the concept of our hospitals paying is alien to our country, it's not happened in 1957. Yes, I would agree with that. But I would say if the hospitals were getting their full complement of funding, this should be part of their budget and they should be able to pay for their electricity. The problem we have is they are not getting the full complement of funding. And as long as they are not getting the full complement of funding, then the government cannot make this claim on them. That is the basis of the problem.
Okay. Well, this morning we're joined by Kwame, Sarpong, Asiedu. We're having a conversation about, that policy that says hospitals should be paying their own electricity bills from their internally generated funds. So, Kwame, I want to get you clearly. The point is that we can only do this if we do certain things right. And we should start from uncapping the national health insurance.
Yes, because that's the biggest, one of the biggest liquidity drivers for these hospitals. So if we want them to be paying their way, then we should make them liquid. Winston, let me ask you, if you have to buy fuel for your car and your employer is not paying you, and your employer then turns around to tell you that, Winston, you have to come to work on time, would you think that is a realistic demand of your employer?
No.
Okay, so how can the government be making that unrealistic demand of our health sector? And we are all sitting down, supine, looking on. You see, that things, like we said, if we are serious about solving this country's problems, we should be able to disaggregate the problems to the point where we can see it from our individual standpoint. If your employer cannot do that to you, and your employer cannot squeeze your earnings to the point that you cannot pay for your electricity at home and therefore cannot iron your clothes, and therefore cannot come to work and sit presentably for people to appreciate your formality, and you wouldn't accept it, why would you accept them to do the same thing so that if you're unwell, you get to the theater and the hospital will tell you, I'm sorry, the theater is shut because we do not have electricity?
Okay. So let's look at it this way. So if not changed, how will this impact the hospitals?
Well, it is clear. The hospitals are clear. You've heard them say, that they would have to shut, especially high energy utilizing services, like the things that operate on heavy equipment, theaters, for example, might be affected. Renal units might be affected. CT scans might be affected. The things that run heavily. And what's that going to do? It's going to push everyone else to go and use those services in the private sector. Is that what we want to do? The private sector's fees are beyond the reach of many.
Well, Kwame, thank you very, very much for joining us. That's Kwame Sarpong Asiedu joining us this morning here on the Super Morning Show.